Hey guys, Austin here. Today I'm a programmer and I'm doing pretty well, but until not too long ago I had another job that, even though many people would have hated it, I liked it. My job was to dress up in costumes at the movies, whether it was a Disney character, a monster in a horror movie, or whatever. I just had to study the character and dress up. That night I had to dress up as Art the Clown, since Terrifier 3 was coming out. At the beginning, I had a hard time watching videos of the previous movies to know how the clown acted. The story was terrifying and very difficult to watch. I preferred not to, but I had to. After watching some compilations on YouTube, I was ready. The movie theater was packed with people waiting to get into the theater. Fans would come up to me, take pictures, ask me to do some poses, and I would try to replicate as best I could. Most of them enjoyed it, although some of them walked away a little scared. It made me feel good, like I was really getting into the role. However, halfway through the night, I noticed someone different in the crowd. It was a man who was looking at me in an intense, somewhat disturbing way. He was watching me without blinking, with a kind of devotion in his eyes, and he wouldn't take his eyes off me. At first, I thought he was just impressed, maybe a hard-bone fan, but there was something in his gaze that I didn't like. I couldn't read too much into it. I kept acting, trying not to lose the part, though every time I turned to the guy, there he still was, watching me with that weird expression. He wasn't even laughing or asking for a picture like the others. He just stood there, like a statue, looking at me in a sickly way. My shift ended around midnight, and after taking off my costume, I was ready to leave. I felt tired, but satisfied. I had done my job, and I had even thought about staying to watch the movie as a spectator. But as I was leaving, I saw him again. A few meters away, the guy was standing by the exit, as if he had been waiting the whole time. I felt a chill that I couldn't ignore. I tried to walk normally, as if I hadn't seen him, but I noticed that he started to follow me. I quickened my pace a little, but so did he. It was as if he always wanted to keep the same distance, not too close and not too far. I started to walk around the block, hoping to throw him off, but the guy kept following me. Every time I looked back, he was there. He didn't speak, he didn't make a move beyond following me. That fixed expression on his face only made me feel more and more uncomfortable. After several minutes, I stopped at a corner and looked directly at him, waiting for some kind of reaction. Nothing. He was just staring at me with those crazed eyes, as if he was waiting for something. "Excuse me, do you need anything?" Instead of answering, he just stared at me, and something in his expression changed. It was as if that was the sign he had been waiting for. Before I could react, the guy leapt toward me. I tried to pull back, but he grabbed my arm with unexpected force. I tried to pull away, but in a matter of seconds, he pulled out a knife and showed it to me threateningly. "Do exactly as I tell you." Once I saw the knife, I stood still and obeyed. He forced me into a car he had parked nearby. As hard as I tried to resist, he held the knife close to my side, forcing me into the vehicle. He tied my hands with a rope he had in the back seat and started the car without saying a word. I could not scream or try to escape. I knew that any movement could cause him to react violently. The drive became endless. Every time I looked towards him, I noticed a twisted smile on his face, a kind of insane satisfaction. I didn't know what he expected from me, but it was clear that he wouldn't let me go so easily. My thoughts went back and forth, trying to find a way out, but every idea seemed futile. We arrived at an old, secluded house in a desolate neighborhood. He dragged me inside, locking the door with several bolts between us. I was trapped and completely helpless. Inside the house, he pushed me into a chair in a dingy room, the walls plastered with Art the Clown posters. He untied my hands and sat down across from me. "I want you to act like Art." Suddenly, he pulled out a gun and pointed it at me. I swallowed saliva and tried to do what he asked me to do. I put my mask back on and tried to intimidate Art, moving mockingly and making threatening gestures with my hands. He watched me, but every now and then he would frown as if he didn't like something. No, you're doing it wrong. You don't understand the character. Art may be evil, but he's also innocent. Don't make an angry face." I tried to correct my acting, but nothing seemed to satisfy him. Every mistake I made him more furious. His expression became more and more twisted. I didn't know how far his madness could go, but a bad feeling ran through me every time he raised his gun and pointed it directly at me. At one point, when I tried to make one of the gestures he was asking for, he pulled the trigger. I felt a sharp pain in my foot. He had shot me without warning, and the pain was unbearable. I fell to my knees, trying not to scream, but the impulse was stronger. My scream echoed in the room, and that seemed to infuriate him even more. Art doesn't scream, he doesn't say a word. Don't you understand the concept of a mime? Dude, I'm not a clown. I didn't even watch the whole movies. I'm just an employee. He pointed the gun at me again, but this time his face showed something beyond anger. It was disappointment, a kind of despair mixed with hatred. I tried to remain calm, but the pain in my foot was unbearable, and I could barely breathe from so much fear. Tired of me, he tried to shoot again, but the gun jammed. That was my moment. Despite the pain in my foot, I lunged for the door and started running, even though I could barely walk without a limp. I made it out into the courtyard, but I heard his footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. I knew he wouldn't let me escape so easily. I made it to the front yard before he caught up with me. I felt a hard blow on my back, and I fell to the ground. The guy had used his belt as a whip, hitting me with unbridled rage. As I lay on the ground, unable to move because of the pain, he continued to take his anger out on me, beating me mercilessly. You see, this is something Art does. If you had seen Terrifier 2, you would know. Some neighbors began to come out of their houses, alerted by the noises. 2 men tried to stop him, but he also hit them with his belt, yelling at them to stay out of the way. I, meanwhile, took the opportunity to crawl towards the exit, trying to get out of that nightmare, although every movement was torture. I managed to cross to the other side of the street while the guy was still venting his fury on the neighbors. They were trying to stop him, but he was completely out of his mind. I could barely understand his screams, but I heard clearly when he pointed at me and shouted, "You'll never be a good Art! Do you hear me? Never!" As he dragged me down the street, the police finally arrived. The officers took the man away as he continued to yell and hit anyone who came near. I was taken to the hospital with a mangled foot and marks from the blows on my back. The man was arrested, and although I was told he would be in jail for a long time, I couldn't shake the idea that he would be looking for me when he got out. Maybe he thinks I am to blame for his arrest. Maybe he just wanted to kill me. I could tell you that today I remember that as part of my past, but it only happened a few weeks ago. I'm afraid of what might happen to me, and I don't think anything can take it away.
Hi, my name is Mitch, and I have a story to tell you. It all started one Friday night. I had returned from a grueling work week, with the sole intention of plopping down on the couch and getting lost in some TV series. However, that peace and quiet didn't last long. Just after 9 o'clock, an uncomfortable feeling came over me. As I looked out the window, I saw something strange on the other side of the street. A man standing motionless in a clown costume. But it wasn't just any clown costume. It was an identical copy of Art the Clown from the movie Terrifier. It wasn't Halloween, nor was there any event in the area to explain the costume. The guy stood there in the streetlight, his black and white outfit stained red, looking straight at me. He wasn't making any movement. He didn't even seem to be breathing. He was just standing there, watching me. I closed the curtains, convinced it was just some madman playing a practical joke, though something about his immobility made me uneasy. To be honest, I'm a big fan of the movie, but having this man disguised as Art in front of your house is immensely frightening. I tried to put it out of my mind. If he was still there in a few minutes, I'd call the cops and just be done with it. I poured myself a beer and settled back on the couch. A few minutes later, I gave in to the temptation to look again. This time, as I opened a crack in the curtains, I noticed that the clown was no longer in the same place. He was now a few meters closer, just at the edge of my sidewalk. His eyes were still fixed on me, as if he knew I was going to look back at that moment. I closed the curtains again, feeling a pang of fear. I tried to convince myself that the guy would be gone soon, that he was just a fan with too much time on his hands. Maybe he was filming a YouTube video or something, and I wasn't going to indulge him by giving him the scary reaction he was surely looking for. After a few more minutes, he disappeared. He probably got bored waiting for me. I was honestly content with not giving him the reaction he was looking for. The next morning, I woke up hoping that there was no one at the window. I rushed to the curtains to get the doubt out of my mind as soon as possible. When I opened them, there was no sign of the clown. I took a deep breath and relaxed. I thought about continuing my life normally, but when I went out to the street to go shopping, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There wasn't just one. There were 3 more people standing on nearby street corners, all dressed as Art the Clown. None of them were making noise or trying to interact with me. They just looked at me. The expression on their faces, that mask of emotionless madness, made me uncomfortable in an inexplicable way. I walked fast, trying to ignore them, but at every corner I found another one. They were all just staring at me. On the way back, I picked up my pace, and when I got home, I couldn't help but take another look at the street. Now there were 5 of them. 5 identical clowns standing in front of my house, not moving, watching me. I tried hard not to lose my cool. I closed the door and all the windows. I tried to concentrate on anything else, but the idea that there was a group of people disguised as a character that inspired so much terror outside my house was impossible to ignore. I decided to call the police. I explained the situation as best I could, even though I felt like a crazy person. They promised to send someone, but I knew they couldn't do much more than scare them a little. They hadn't committed any crime. They were just standing there, watching. The police came by later and the clowns scattered before the patrol cars arrived. I felt stupid explaining to them what I had seen. When they left, I opened the door to make sure they were really gone. But then I saw a letter stuck in the door with a rusty knife. It was a dirty piece of paper with a simple sentence written in red letters. Art will be back. I didn't understand what it meant. Why was I being harassed? I went back inside the house and locked all the doors and windows. That night I didn't sleep, expecting to hear the sounds of footsteps, laughter, or movement outside. But there was nothing. Just a heavy silence that oppressed me. The next night, I decided to check the security cameras I installed months ago in front of the house. After 3 a.m, I saw them arrive. At least 7 clowns were gathered in front of my house, formed in a sort of circle. None of them spoke or made a sound. They just stood there, motionless, as if waiting for a signal. I watched the video over and over again, trying to find some clue, but they just stood there, staring at me through the screen. I turned off the monitor, not knowing what to do. The silence in the house seemed unbearable, and every second felt heavier. Over the next few days, the sightings became more constant. They were no longer just outside at night. Some of them began to appear in broad daylight, in the garden, in the windows, watching me as I tried to ignore them. I felt they were harassing me in a way that went far beyond any joke. I tried to yell at them, but they ignored me. I thought about fighting one of them or threatening them, but honestly, I was scared to death. Although, I would defend myself if I had to. To my surprise, it happened much faster than I thought it would. The tension came to a head one night when I heard a sharp knock at the back door. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and slowly made my way there. As I opened the door, I saw it. One of the clowns was standing in the kitchen doorway. He was inside my house. Without thinking, I stepped back and slammed it shut, trying to think of a way to throw him out. The clown didn't move. He just stood in the doorway staring at me. Before long, 2 other clowns appeared behind him. Then, without warning, the 3 of them started walking towards me, surrounding me. I tried to run, but one of them lunged at me. I managed to shove him away, but the other 2 pounced. I fell to the ground, hitting my head. Before I could react, they grabbed me, pinning me down. The details of their costumes were disturbing. Each of them wore the same repulsive makeup, their faces lifeless but with a mocking smile plastered on them. They led me into the living room and pushed me to the floor, tying my hands. I then saw one of them approach me with a long, rusty knife. I felt my heart hammering in my chest. I tried to scream, but it was in vain. My efforts only seemed to amuse them. A clown opened the door, and others came in. Suddenly, my house became a clown circus. As the clown with the knife approached, I realized something horrible. As he opened his mouth to mock me, I saw that he had no tongue. When he saw that I noticed, all of the clowns opened their mouths. None of them had tongues. They were all so committed to not speaking like the clown in the movie that they deprived themselves of the ability to speak for the rest of their lives. That's when I understood that this level of commitment was not normal. This was a cult. I tried to resist, moving my arms and legs, but each of them held me with unrelenting force. One of them held my jaw, while another brought the knife close to my mouth. They were going to cut out my tongue. Desperation came over me, and I kicked all over the place. I don't know who these men were, but they were just normal people. None of these were the real art. In a desperate act, I managed to turn around with a shove and bit the ankle of the clown with the knife. The other clowns were surprised, so I took the opportunity to stand up and run with all of my might, knocking down 2 of the clowns in the process that were holding me to the ground. With all of my strength, I threw myself against the window, shattering the glass in an explosion of shards. I fell into the garden, and pain shot through my body. But I got up and started running, staggering, without looking back. I could barely hold on, but my legs carried me out of that cursed house. As I turned around, I saw that all of the clowns were standing at the broken window, watching me as they smiled. None of them tried to follow me. They just looked at me with those deformed grimaces, waving and laughing voicelessly. After that night, I left town, and I never returned. I talked to the owner of the house I was renting and told him I would never rent that house again, but he ignored me. After that day, I never saw Terrifier again. And since I found out that Terrifier 3 was going to be released, I couldn't sleep because I was petrified. It's very hard for me to talk about this subject. Many times I tell people that I don't remember anything, that I repressed it. But that's a lie. I remember everything as if it were yesterday. We'd gone out to see one of those horror movies that Lucy likes so much. I'm not that much of a fan, but it was a good excuse to go out and share an evening together. The theater was almost empty. Just a few people scattered around the room. Before you wonder, no, we didn't go to see Terrifier. That night we'd gone to see Smile 2. Terrifier was just not my kind of movie. I'm not much of a gore fan. At the end of the movie, we were walking back down the carpeted hallway towards the exit, commenting on the exaggeration of the scary scenes and the abrupt ending. Everything seemed calm until we saw someone standing in front of the bathrooms, not moving. It was a guy dressed as Art the Clown. I may not have seen any of his movies, but I recognized him. My first thought was that the movie theater had hired someone to scare people in the lobby, but his expression made me uneasy. He didn't look like an entertainer. He was alone, standing alone, looking at us with a smile that didn't move an inch. Lucy noticed it too, and though she was amused at first, she grabbed my arm as if something about him made her uncomfortable too. We walked a little faster towards the exit, avoiding his gaze, but the guy started walking behind us. At first, I thought it would be some harmless prank, some kind of rather invasive advertising campaign. The clown didn't say anything, he just walked, keeping an exact distance. We walked out of the theater and down a deserted street, still laughing, but partly tense because of the guy who was now right behind us. I didn't look back, but I could hear his footsteps. Always the same distance. Always silent. Lucy, somewhat startled, whispered that maybe he was just trying to scare us as part of some movie theater event. But there was something about the way he walked that felt too personal. Something was off about his presence. It was as if he was studying our every move. We quickened our pace, and although at first it looked like he was going to lag behind, I saw him turn around out of the corner of my eye. He was still there. The only difference was that now his steps were faster. I stopped dead in my tracks, trying to make him understand that we had noticed his game. But the man stood still, just looking at me. Lucy tugged my arm, whispering for us to keep walking. We both knew this man had nothing to do with the movie theater, since we had already left it. The danger was real. As we reached the corner, we turned and took another street, looking to get away from him. But as we crossed, there he was again, on the next corner, waiting. It didn't make sense. There was no way he could catch up to us that fast. I was beginning to wonder if he was watching us, finding routes to get ahead of us. We tried to ignore him and pretend he wasn't there, but the man with that strange, fixed smile appeared again and again at every corner we crossed. We changed streets, even picked up the pace on some stretches, but it was as if he knew exactly where we were going. Lucy was already terrified, and I felt a strange pressure in my chest. At one point, I decided to confront him, to see if he had any intention beyond scaring us. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and, this time, looked directly at him. Lucy stood behind me, trembling, while the guy simply stopped too, pinning that vacant stare on mine. I asked him in a trembling voice what he wanted, but I got no answer. He didn't move a finger. He just looked at me, smiling. He didn't say a word, nor did he make any gesture. We started walking quickly in the direction of the parking lot where we had left the car. We tried to lose ourselves among the streets, but every time we thought we had left him behind, there he was, standing still, waiting for us in some dark corner in the middle of the sidewalk, always with that damn smile. He didn't make a sound. Even when he moved, he seemed to float effortlessly, and his gaze stayed locked on us, no matter the distance. I felt the adrenaline pushing me to act, so determined to put an end to this, I walked towards him. When I was close, I tried to tell him to stop, that we'd had enough. But the guy just bowed his head, as if he were a toy with a broken gear. "Who are you? What do you want?" Suddenly, without changing his expression, he extended his hand and greeted me. He pulled something out of his pocket. Lucy thought he was going to pull out a knife, so we stepped back, but no. Art's impersonator pulled out a clown horn and started laughing at us for thinking it was a weapon. Suddenly, he got serious and started to press it frantically, making non-stop noise. We were backing away, frozen, not knowing which way to turn. Then the man stopped blowing the clown horn and stared at me. In just a second, the clown dropped the horn and lunged at me. Lucy screamed and tried to push him away, but he wasn't looking at her. He was completely focused on me. Before I could get up, he violently pressed my neck to the ground and choked me as hard as he could. I struggled with him, feeling his fingers squeezing me tighter and tighter. I was losing the fight. Lucy pulled the heel off of her foot and hit him as hard as she could. The guy seemed to stagger for a moment, but then spun toward her, still smiling. I lunged at him, ready to punch him, but suddenly, and to my surprise, the man spoke. His smile faded for the first time, and he took a step back, holding his hand to his head. He mumbled something like a strange apology, saying that he was just a fan, that he didn't mean to hurt anyone. His words ran over each other, and Lucy and I just watched him, feeling something between pity and anger. I seized the moment and pulled out my phone to call the police. But before I could dial, the guy let out an angry scream and lunged at us again. He was no longer acting like Art. Now, He was just a violent man who wanted to hurt us for no reason. On impulse, Lucy raised her heel again and hit him with all of her might, making the guy fall to the ground. I got on top of him and held him down, beating him out of the fight, while Lucy called the police. The police arrived a few minutes later, taking him away while he was still babbling incomprehensible things. They didn't tell us much about him, only that he was a fame seeker. That night, Lucy and I couldn't sleep. We kept thinking about why someone would kill someone just for fame or fun. His story may not be very important because he didn't kill anyone, thankfully. But for me and my girlfriend, it will always be a before and after moment. Since then, we've stopped going to the movies.